So we're on to chapter 4 of Kill All Normies, which is called Conservative Culture Wars. As we go into chapter 4, the base problem with the entire analysis in this book rears its ugly head again. There is this continued presumption of a right-wing basis behind this Anglospheric rebellion against the liberal and neoliberal establishment. This seems hard to credit when you look at the popularity of Bernie or Corbyn, as well as Trump, who appealed to cynicism and iconoclasm rather than right-wing values per se. This fundamental misunderstanding, at least to my interpretation, undermines the entire enterprise of this book, Kill All Normies. I mean, take the obsession with Milo Yiannopoulos that runs throughout this chapter again. It's evident all through chapter 4. Milo is not a genuine person. If people were words, he would be the antonym of sincere. I doubt very much whether he even knows what he believes. He doesn't seem to have a sincere bone in his body, and if he's ever had one, it's belonged to a black man. That said, he does have some applicable analysis, or what passes for applicable analysis, and some of that is picked up on in this book. I just think it's a mistake to think of Milo as being truly conservative, and it's even more of a mistake when you look at many of his followers and fans and people who watch what he creates. They just enjoy the car crash and agree with him on some things but not all. There isn't that same requirement to buy into an orthodoxy that exists on the left or amongst traditional conservatives either. Punk, which this new supposed conservatism constantly draws comparison to amongst itself in a kind of cringy quest for some kind of street credibility. But punk was about anarchy. It had no unifying principle, and its war cry was destroy. That's pure iconoclasm. It's not an ideology, really, though many punks did have ideology and many subscribed to anarchism. But that's probably why so many people across the political spectrum can unite together, just in opposition to what exists, not necessarily in agreement to what they want. They just want anything to change, because the current status quo is failing all kinds of different people. Another good insight from this chapter is that culture can trump politics. So, at least when it comes to backing your side. So Obama could drone strike a wedding in Afghanistan, and that was fine, so long as he said the right things about gay marriage or whatever. And going the other way, it's okay for Trump to annihilate medical care, ruin families, effectively kill a whole bunch of people, just so long as he's appropriately pro-business, or at least seems to be much of the time. The book picks up on a comparison Milo did, comparing Trump to Buchanan, both being kind of cultural candidates. And it's not wrong exactly, save that Trump won and Buchanan didn't. Buchanan, of course, was lashing out at the PC culture of the 90s, which in many ways towards the end was as bad as our current one. It was also a delayed backlash against the culture war of the 1960s. However, what isn't really understood is that the current anti-PC backlash is anti-conservative with a small c, and this was to an extent true in the 90s as well, at least towards the end. Comedians and other people who have bucked against the current over-PC, hyper-PC world, they were starting to kick back at the end of the 90s as well. The 90s PC war went too far at the end. The current one started too far and has only gotten worse. And we're now in this weird position of having large C conservatives alongside ideologically consistent liberals, libertines and libertarians fighting against that small c conservatism, which is as much being expressed by the left as the right. These are some weird times that we live in. Much talk in both cases, historical and current, has been made about the threat to the West, to Western civilization, to rationalism, to liberty, to patriotism, nationalism, and so forth. We used to be able to say proudly and accurately that reality has a left-wing bias. And that remains true to an extent, economically, environmentally, in terms of social policy and so forth. But it's less true, or not true at all, around many of the topics that the current pseudo-left is obsessed with. Identity politics, for example, the 4 billion genders, the idea that words are violence, but violence can also be a valid form of expression when it's actual violence. That eliminating racism has been replaced with demands for special treatment and resegregation from the very communities that once fought against it. The left has gone mad. Not that the right hasn't also gone mad around such things as climate change. You know, they're just as postmodern in a way around that. But even more horrifying is the real right's solution to these issues that arise from what the left has done. To embrace that same sad mistake that the left did, identity politics, postmodernism, only they do it through a different kind of racial, national and political identity politics. It isn't so much the loss of white, male, heterosexual, cisgendered identity that's created the crisis. All of those things had become essentially meaningless as far back as the 90s. Rather, it's the rise of the person of colour identity, the female identity, the trans identity, the non-binary identity, as politically and socially superior identities. That they've become, rather than the pursuit of equality, an expression of assumed superiority of these identities through victimhood, paradoxically, and via attacking the opposite identities, the cis-het white male identity. And that has in turn bred resentment and created fertile ground for the identitarians of the right. After all these cis-het white men have spent years becoming perfectly, accepting and understanding and tolerant, only to find themselves turned on for the sins of the fathers, so to speak. Being blamed for everything constantly is wearing. Being held accountable for the sins of others is wearing. Being marginalised and silenced by the kinds of people who, of anyone, should know better than to do that is angering. Poor white communities being passed up, left to rot despite their level of need, in favour of people who have the right kinds of identities, if not the right kinds of need. Little wonder that Trump's lies, designed to appeal to these kind of passed over groups, landed and they bore fruit. But the same is also true for the more uplifting left-wing message of people like Corbyn and Sanders, who have both been sabotaged by the neoliberal left. So, this can go one of two ways, and self-sabotage has prevented it going leftward, at least in my analysis. I mean, who can blame this disaffected, blamed, bullied, white cis-het male, whatever you want to call it, group? Who can really blame them for being vulnerable to suggestions that, well, black and brown people could be proud of their race, why can't whites? People can be proud of their foreign heritage, why can't you be proud of your national heritage? People can be proud of their abnormal, in the non-pejorative sense, sexuality and gender expression, why can't you be proud of being heterosexual and cissexual? Well, you can't really blame people for being vulnerable to those questions, and frankly there's no real reason why you can't be proud of those things, other than the same reason you can't be proud of being brown or gay or whatever. This is all pointless things to be proud of. It's not anything you have any control over. So it makes as much or as little sense to be proud of being white as it does for being brown. None of it makes any sense to my point of view, but it should at least be even. The right might be monsters in a lot of ways, but the left has helped create that monster, or at least the left has. There's a lot of analysis in the book about the Cold War, but much like World War II, the Cold War just isn't that relevant to a lot of people in the kinds of movements that this book is talking about. Someone born as the Cold War ended in 1989 is nearly 30 now, and will have no meaningful memory of the Cold War. Hell, most people born after 1980 have no real point of reference to it either. Their formative years growing up, it was already over. It's 9/11 and the Great Depression that have shaped the millennials and many of the preceding generations. It's not the USSR and the USA. It's not communism versus capitalism. It's not conformity versus non-conformity. This is precisely the issue and the failing of this book. The old forms of analyses just don't apply. The situation we're in now is authoritarian versus libertarian, not left versus right. It's the internet generation versus the TV generation. It's interactivity versus passivity. It's speeches versus hecklers, if you want to put it that way. The way Trump tweets directly to people shows that he understands this probably more intuitively than intellectually, more than most other people in the political establishment. That kind of direct, unfiltered connection is likely the shape of things to come, though hopefully executed in a better way. I mean, the book attempts to turn Milo and his fans into postmodernists like everyone else, but this isn't convincing. Irony, doublespeak, playfulness, and it's just a prank, bro, are not the same as postmodernism, which tells you that there's no truth and that everything is relative, that facts don't exist. It undermines science. Milo and others might misuse science, but they're not trying to undermine it. They're trying to kind of lay claim to its authority. But at the same time, Milo and others expose this sham of postmodernism by mocking it, while others who wouldn't even regard themselves as being on the same side as Milo, at least normally, do much the same thing. Dawkins, Harris, Bill Maher, and others assert this anti-postmodernism, the value of truth and reason. And while the right might misuse and misrepresent those things, they're at least united against postmodernism as it finds itself expressed on the left. For all they might be political opponents elsewhere. And this is the same kind of model that I've been talking about. The old left-right dichotomy doesn't apply, and you don't need orthodoxy. You don't need to agree on everything to agree on something. Take feminism, for example. Buchanan, referring back to that, he might have opposed feminism, but it's because he saw it as a threat to traditional values. Milo and the rationalists opposed feminism not because of traditional values, but because feminism has become irrational, authoritarian, censorious, and unhinged, and a threat to fundamental values and liberties. The problem is that a lot of people don't see or understand that. And so, if you oppose feminism, they think you must be of the back to the kitchen variety. They jump the gun and therefore fail to understand the real content of the criticism that you're presenting. They assume that anyone who's anti-feminist must necessarily be anti-woman or want to remove women's rights or something, and that's just, simply not the case. Nagle repeatedly seems to understand that Milo's brand of conservatism isn't truly conservative, but then keeps backing away from that revelation again. That Milo was brought low by traditional conservatism and a moral panic over pederasty that wasn't ever really there in what he said should be clue enough. But somehow this revelation, like I said, never seems to quite stick. She even dubs Milo's camp followers and fellow travellers as the new libertines, but then spoils it with of an online irreverent punk right, which isn't accurate. This isn't left, it isn't right, but as the neoliberal left became small c conservative, it for some reason began to be associated with the right. Now the right has ridden it a little and used it for power, it's flexing its own muscles again and threatening the very free expression and individualism that helped buoy it up, just as the left turned on it before. Now all these people across the spectrum of this new libertarian left and right are caught between the authoritarians of the left and right, the old school conservatives on the one hand and the social justice warriors on the other. Being called problematic or degenerate amounts to the same thing. It's not a conservative culture war, it's a libertarian culture war against authoritarianism. As for Milo, he's a political Satanist, playing at the Catholic Mass because he can, because it upsets the church, not because it's what he actually believes.